Hi, I'm Giles Martin. I'm here in Abbey Road Studio 2. I was actually born in 1969 on John Lennon's birthday, which fascinated him. He said to my dad, "No, you're not sort of arsehole he's going to turn out to be." It's funny, growing up as a kid, having a father like George Martin, you can't compare it to anything else. I've never actually swapped dads with anyone. But we didn't necessarily, myself and my sister didn't necessarily grow up in a terribly musical house, apart from, as a kid, I noticed my dad played the piano a lot, and odd people would come back and forth. In fact, when I was a playgroup, they went around the class, and I was about 4 or 5, and they said, what do your parents do for a living? And they, my dad's an accountant, my dad's a lawyer, my dad's a truck driver, whatever. And I said, my dad just sits at home and plays the piano. And it turns out he was writing, I think he was writing the music for Live and Let Die, the film at the time. And there's huge embarrassment amongst my parents. They go, he's not employed, he's got a proper job. And so it wasn't a sort of thing. I think growing up I didn't necessarily grow up in a musical household. It wasn't, I had the privilege of meeting people like Paul McCartney at an early age and meeting, the Beatles at an early age, but they were just friends of my parents. It didn't mean a whole lot to me as a kid. I remember when I became interested in the guitar and became interested in songwriting, Paul did say to me, he was incredibly encouraging. He goes, "That's great, I find it difficult to write songs, and I'm Paul McCartney." So I did have a privileged sort of background as far as that goes. My parents were always very wary of me getting a proper job. I learned to play the guitar, as some people might be able to see, quite badly. But behind my parents' back, it was a thing, don't join the music industry. I'm delighted I did. In fact, I really got involved in music because my dad started to lose his hearing when I was about 16, and he needed a second pair of ears, and he didn't really want to tell people he was losing his hearing, so I became his ears to a certain extent. I'd come in and try and help him. Through that, I would learn off him, and we started working together. And it was actually a great thing because I was needed to a certain extent by him, which is nice as a son and a father working together. At the same time, he was always very good. He never had a sort of "that's my boy" kind of attitude. He was always very receptive to my ideas. And in fact, he's been receptive to people's ideas throughout the whole of his career. And he treated me no differently and was always open to my suggestions, however wrong they may be. And God knows I made lots of wrong ones. So it gave me a chance to learn, and gave me a chance to respect him for what he does and what he's done. I never I was never any good at learning songs off by heart. I mean, I bluffed my way through most things. I've never been terribly accurate at playing anything. I can play a number of things very badly, but I was much more interested in playing for a reason. So as soon as I learned to play the guitar with a friend of mine, we started playing in the underground here, started playing in tube stations. Playing whatever songs we could learn, basically, as you do. And my dad was especially distraught by this. He didn't want, George Martin's son being arrested because it's illegal. At that stage, it was illegal to busk. In fact, the way we played it should have been illegal, but it was illegal to busk. And I then got into playing bands. I formed a band, as you do, and I had a great time. I think playing in a band, learning to play an instrument, learning to play a guitar was the best thing I ever did. And not that I practice the guitar or play it very often now, but it opens so many doors as far as if you're willing to play it to people, if you're willing to bore people with it. It's great, to meet people and chat. It's like a great hobby to have. It's better than video games, for instance. And I think that being in a band taught me more about recording and music, fun enough, than being the son of George Martin did. Because if you're the son of someone, people expect you have this knowledge, which generally you don't have. People think you grew up in recording studios. Of course, I'd spent more time in studios than probably other people are 16, but it's still just a row of buttons. If you're 16, it's still just, a compressor. Of course, I know what a compressor does. I hadn't got a clue for a long time because people expect you to know these things. But if you're in a band, especially as I was in an unsuccessful band, you have a chance to make a whole lot of mistakes and learn stuff. And the hardest thing, not that it's a bad thing, but the hardest thing if you're a son of someone famous or a child of a famous person is you don't get that many chances to make mistakes before people go. People are hoping for the second coming. People are going, he's going to be just like his dad. And if you screw up, you're then the other way. He couldn't get a proper job. And so being in a sort of hidden band gave me a chance to learn. And that's what, music is about evolving. It's about discovering new stuff. It's about learning new songs. It's about learning how things work. It's not about playing the same old things every day, then things become boring. After playing in a band, I carried on playing I always played with people, always like going on tour and playing in pubs and clubs. So I thought it was just great fun. And I started writing jingles, I started writing commercials. I started doing gasoline adverts. That was for France. French gasoline was the peak of my life. And that was when I was at university. And then when I left university, I wanted to become a record producer. I wanted to write music for people and produce people, but I couldn't. I didn't have any, what do? You can't go, I'm the son of George Martin, let me produce you, or give me a job. And so I ended up working in press. And at the same time, I started looking at bands. And funny enough, my dad was he was nervous, I think, of me following in his footsteps at this stage. And I saw a band called My Life Story. They're playing My Life Story. They're playing at the Astoria in London. And I went to go see them play, and I thought they were good. And they had a whole lot of strings, and I did an arrangement of them and produced them. And they released a single that became sort of #1 in Melody Maker and Enemy and the Cool magazines. And someone showed it to my dad and said, look what your son's been up to. And I was just doing it in the evenings, as you do if you're a fan of music and you want to get into music. And that kind of opened doors for me. I left the press job and became a producer. Production engineering is something that you learn stuff all the time with, like any sort of music. I mean, I think for me, starting out and how I am now, if I can work in any form of music, I'm happy. It doesn't matter. It's just, I think I produce more stuff now and remix and mix stuff now, probably because in a way it's what people expect of me, and maybe I'm okay at it. The Love project came from the fact that they needed to do a show. It was George Harrison and Guy Liberté, who's the head of Cirque du Soleil, were friends. And they decided to do a show, and they decided they couldn't have anyone singing Beatles songs a la Mamma Mia. They didn't want, a chorus singing Hey Jude on stage. And I think that's the right decision. And so they approached my dad, and I'd just had quite a lot of success in the UK doing classical stuff at the time. And Apple came to see me, and I sat with my dad and talked to them about it. And I said to them, I could try creating a gig that never happened. And Neil Aspinall, who was the head of Apple, said, I'd love, we talked about, because he was their roadie, we talked about their shows. We talked about, starting off with Long Tall Sally and finishing with Twist and Shout, or, creating the thing. And I said, well, listen, with Pro Tools and digital stuff, I can perhaps create a gig that never happened. So, under complete secrecy, I went upstairs here into a very small room and took some material, and I took at the beginning, the drums from the end, and Get Back, because I realized they're the same tempo, and because I thought I'd start a gig, never happened, with a drum solo going into a song, and started moving things around, and people said mashing up. I always thought it was a bit rude. And then thought, how am I going to start this? And got the piano from A Day in the Life and turned that backwards, because I thought if that makes a good ending, it'll make a good beginning as it sucks into the chord from Hard Day's Night. I just had fun, And my view was, if I can impress my dad doing Beatles stuff, then that's pretty good. As a son, you're always trying to impress your dad, I think, or compete in some way. And it just so happened that it was on Beatles stuff, and I was auditioning for the Beatles. And I really thought that they probably wouldn't like it. I really thought people would think this is a really bad idea. It sounds like a bad idea if you just talk about it. And I then took Within You, Without You and Tomorrow Never Knows and stuck those together, because I thought this will definitely get me fired, if nothing else. And they came and they really liked it. They liked the ideas. And so I ended up becoming the sort of legacy which I kind of fought against for a long time. And here I am now in Abbey Road talking about it. Suddenly became part of it, and I backed up all the catalogue onto Pro Tools and started working on this project, which became Love. I came with my dog Stan and went to my room and started working. We had a list. I worked with the director of the show and my dad. My dad would come in 2 days a week, and I'd play him ideas and we'd work through stuff. So he was kind of producing me doing it. But the bosses were the Beatles, Ringo and Paul, and Olivia Harrison and Yoko Ono, who were representing George and John. And it was important that they liked everything. They had to hear everything before it was passed on anywhere else. And the interesting thing about the Beatles, it's such a protected circle, rightfully so, that if you do something and no one likes it, no one ever hears it. You know, and that's actually quite a good thing for me, because it means I could take risks. You know, occasionally people at Abbey Road were sort of, you know, people who hadn't heard anything, which the majority of people here, didn't like the idea of what we were doing, and didn't like the idea of me coming in and changing. People think it's changing history, but it's not, because I'm not deleting anything. I wasn't, you know, I was just really trying to do something different. And Ringo and Paul would come in. The funny thing is they come and listen to stuff, and they're not allowed to take stuff away either. It's not like you give them a CD. The only chance of them listening to the new mixes we were doing was by coming here and listening to them. And then later, as we got the technology sorted out and secure drives were done, I would go and see Yoko and sit down with her and work through stuff. And it's fascinating. For me, it was fascinating because I have no past with them. You know, I certainly wasn't there at the time. And so it's kind of on an even, I'm way down the pecking order, but it's kind of, I meet on an even keel, as it were. There's no history. I have no, you know, experience of anything they did. So it was quite easy for me just to go, do you like it, or what don't you like about it? And they were very proactive in it, all four of them, you know, the two wives and Ringo and Paul. You know, Paul was the one that would give me the fear, because he's such a good musician. I mean, Ringo's a pretty good musician as well, and they'd you know, they know their stuff and they know their own material. And occasionally, in fact, when we were doing the show, I sat down with Paul and I went through each bit and, you know, played in bits in the theatre, and it was great. It was a great evening. And he goes, you know, he said to me, you know, I'd have to say I really like what you've done, and what you've done has been sympathetic with my music, and I really appreciate that. For me, that was just, you know, the best. But when it came to the opening of the show, at the very beginning, when people walk into the theatre and they're sitting down, I couldn't work out because they wanted Beatles music to play, and someone said, well, why don't you just do another 60 minutes of, and I mean, it took me 2 years to do the 90 minutes. So I decided to get as many Beatles on as I could by taking the vocals off, which is difficult with Beatles stuff because there's so much leakage on the tracks, and just play the backing tracks. So it's like the Beatles are playing, they're backing as you walk in. So you have Dear Prudence with no vocal, you know, you have Should Have Known Better with no vocal, and Penny Lane with no vocal. And the idea was that it would counterpoint Because. When Because starts, it's just vocals. So I'm sitting with Paul, and my dad's there and Paul's there, and Penny Lane's playing in the ceiling of the theatre. And Paul goes, and what's this then? And I went, it's Penny Lane. Because I know it's bloody Penny Lane, but what's it doing in the ceiling? And I said, well, I just thought it'd be an idea to, you know, because they listened to everything. I thought it'd be an idea to maybe put the backing tracks up there. And he's like, oh, okay, you know, I'll have a listen. And it's right there, because it is their music. And, you know, and my dad sometimes, you know, he feels embarrassed because it's not his music, and it certainly isn't mine. It is theirs. There were 4 Beatles, and it was their band, and that was it. There's no 5th Beatle. With music, there's things you'd like to do. I wish I could play things better. You know, I've always thought, you know, it'd be great to really learn how to play the bass properly, or guitar properly, or piano properly. You know, but it's just a question of time. Maybe I'll start watching our video tunes and then become a better musician. But you know, I'd like to, you know, work with, you know, a really good young band. At the same time, I'd love to go and do something like the Love Project with something else, you know, with taking stuff and creating, make people listen to music again. The good thing about Love is people do analyze it, people do listen, and people don't have it on the background, they do actually get into it. And that's why we do music. We do music because we're passionate about it. And so, really, I mean, I'm about to write a television thing, you know, it's a question of writing, producing, and being creative. And anything that lets you do that, you take. And every day, I just can't believe I can do this for a living. You know, I was told by my parents for years it's an impossible job to do for a living, despite coming from my background, because I think maybe when I have kids, I'll be doing the same thing. You know, don't go into music. You know, but you do it because you love it, and if you can get paid for it, it means you don't have to do another job to get in the way as well. So it's fantastic. I would say to anyone learning an instrument, anyone, you know, struggling, because let's face it, we all struggle with instruments all the time, and we struggle with music. is that no matter how hard it is, it's hard for everyone. And that love that you have for it, never let go of it, because you might be trying to learn a song and go, I'm never going to learn this. But the fact of it is, you do learn, and you do move on. And the thing to do is never ever give up, never ever lose that drive and that feeling you get when you work something out or you hear some great music, because it's much better than sitting down and watching the telly. I mean, the thing about music is that I think if anyone's toured, I used to tour a lot. You end up kind of working on automatic pilot, and you start amusing yourself with stuff. I was playing bass in a band, and you start playing the same things over and over again. And I was once in Germany, and I used to jump off the stage, and I jumped off the stage, and I had no idea until I left the how far I was jumping. We played the end of the concert, and I jumped off the stage, and there was no crowd there. I mean, let's face it, we weren't that popular, but there was a break before the people. And I launched off the stage, and seeing the band's faces, and they looked at me, I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die in a shit club in Germany. And I dropped about 12 feet. My bass amp almost followed me, because I didn't have wireless or anything. The bass, it was like Wile E. Coyote. My lead unraveled. It was the only thing that kept me alive. And an Ampeg SV200 or they called came crashing down afterwards. But yeah, I spent most of my time being laughed at by people. I think it's important. I think it's important in studios to have a good laugh. It's funny, I mean, it's the Beatles. It's one thing that was shocking for me from listening to all of the tapes, everything they did, was not how serious it was. It was how much kind of fun there is in the tapes. Even when you think, oh, the White Album they didn't get on, they're really cracking up most of the time. And it's kind of, you forget that actually they came to the studio to have a good time, and all the other stuff you read about happened in offices and accountants and all that sort of stuff. Most of the studio stuff is great. And that's the thing about music. Music should be fun. If you're learning music, have a laugh with it, and don't sit on your own and do it. Find someone to play with, because the great thing about music is there's always someone worse than you. I mean, in my case, you really have to hunt them out, but there is, and so show off to someone. Well, the great thing about the internet is the fact you can delve into the world of songs and work out chords. And one of the problems I struggle from is you look on the internet, and quite often the chord sheets are wrong. There's some guy going, if you know the right way this song goes, please write in. You think, oh, that's no good. I can work that out. And the great thing about iVideo tunes is it breaks down that barrier, and you're suddenly being taught by professionals. You're suddenly being taught in a simple way by professionals. It's kind of inspired me. I saw iVideo tunes before I got involved in it, and it's inspired me to going, right, I'm going to see if I can learn the piano better now. And I think that's a great thing. People don't have access to the best people in the world, and now with iVideo tunes they do. You can be taught by some of the best people, from home, and the way it's shot and the way it's done is very simple. If I can understand it, it's very simple. So I think it's a great thing. It's a great learning tool for people, and I think hopefully it'll create great musicians in the future. I'm Giles Martin. I'm here in Abbey Road Studio 2 to talk about Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. Now, Sgt. Pepper was recorded on the 1st of February 1967, and it kind of was a revolution in lots of ways. The album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, wouldn't have been called that if it wasn't for the song. And Paul had this idea. They'd kind of been through a torrid time touring, and they decided there was going to be no more touring. And Paul had an idea of coming up with an alter ego and having a band and becoming someone else, to move away from the fame and to kind of remove the Beatles away from their Beatlemania spotlight. And John wasn't that keen, but as Sgt. Pepper's became more and more sort of hallucinogenic, he liked the idea. And they became this other band. The idea is, Paul had this idea that the Beatles wouldn't go on tour, but Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band would go on tour for them, i.e. the record. Now that's something that happens nowadays with people's videos. You know, it's what happens. But it was groundbreaking at the time. And the song is a fairly standard rock and roll song, apart from the way it was done. And there were lots of firsts with it. You know, it was the first time that a bass had been DI'd, and that means no amplifier. They'd actually built their own boxes here at Abbey Road and experimented and plugged the bass straight in, which gave more of a cutting sound to it and was recorded on its own track. The drums were very close mic'd for the first time in Beatles stuff. And actually, as soon as American engineers and producers heard the drums on Sgt. Pepper, they immediately tried to replicate it. And this had a kind of closeness and the chance of DIing. When John Lennon found out about the DI'd bass, he always wanted to change his voice, and especially at this time. That's why he had so much tape echo on his voice, which sounded great, but that was his demand. And he said to my dad that he wanted to be DI'd. He wanted his vocal DI'd. And my dad said, fine, just, you know, you have to have an operation in your neck to put the jack plug in. So it was groundbreaking technology, but also it's very driving as a song. It's got Paul's, I think Paul's playing the guitar on it. I think the way it's set out is it's just, they recorded it with just guitars and drums to begin with. Knocked it out. The bass was added later. And then the lead guitar, which is Paul as well, was French horns and guitar on the same track. And the vocals were double tracked. Again, the three of them all singing around the same mic. Paul's lead vocal is kind of, I mean, it's a great rock vocal, but it has a surprising amount of plate reverb just facing me through there at the Abbey Road plates, which are huge long bits of metal which create all the echo. And this has enormous amounts of reverb on it for a Beatles record. Once the track, they'd filled up 3 tracks, and on the 4th track, they just have BBC Sound Library effects. And this starts off the song. You have the tuning of an orchestra, an auditorium. I think my dad always said it was the recording of something from the Albert Hall, or who knows. And interspersed with crowd noises, there's applause coming in, there's gasps from the audience. And the whole idea was to set up a fictitious band performance, I suppose. You know, it wasn't the Beatles, it was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and it was introducing the new album and introducing a new idea. So in summary, the song's built up of this sort of driving rhythm guitar, and the bass was added later. But Paul wanted Sgt. Pepper's, the band, to be kind of like an old school band to a certain extent, so he used things like French horns. And the French horns, the four horn players came in, and the way it was done, as Paul sang the parts to my dad, he wrote them out, gave them to horn players, and they played them. And it was funny actually, quite often with where the Beatles were recording these players, they didn't realize that their lips would start hurting, and so he'd go, oh no, do it again. When they did For No One, for instance, Paul goes, I think you can do better. My dad goes, his lips are about to fall off. You know, they never quite realized this, but the horn players got into it, and I think some of the actual other Beatles performances, especially around this time, are fantastic. My dad's always just said that Sgt. Pepper's is Paul at his rock and roll best, you know, singing, really kind of getting it, you know. And you know, I think the thing about Paul, he never held back with his vocals. In fact, none of them did. There was no sort of sensibility or preparation. Each one was a performance.
The tone for the first guitar in Sgt. Pepper's is obviously overdriven on the lead parts. You want to make sure you use a bridge pickup on your guitar and crank the gain up, and it's just a basic, straightforward, high gain rock sound. And then you can switch the channel and get something that's a little bit, actually quite a bit cleaner when you get into the chords. You just want to make sure that it has enough distortion that it sounds like it's rocking, but it's clean enough that it doesn't really break up the chords too much. And when you get to some of those dominant 7th chords, you want to make sure you can hear all the notes. If it's too distorted, it'll kind of blur all the sound of those notes ringing together and the overtones. And for the second guitar part, it's really pretty much the same kind of thing. It's just a semi-overdriven, bright sound that works for rhythm. And the test really is to play some of those dominant seventh chords and make sure they're not too muddy when they're strummed together. So that's the electric guitar tone for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. The song's in the key of G in standard tuning. And guitar one plays that intro lead, so I'm going to play it in time and break it down slowly. So that starts with the 9th fret on the 3rd string, to the 8th, and then 10th fret on the 2nd string. You just play that twice in a row, and the 3rd phrase is extended, so you start off the same way. The 9th fret on the 3rd string, then 8 to 10 on the 2nd string, and then 8 to 10 on the 1st string. And then backing up, 8 to 6 to 8 on the 2nd string, ending on the 7th fret of the 3rd string. So it sounds like this again. And that's the guitar one intro for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
It was 20 years ago today. Sgt. Pepper told the band to play. They've been going in and out of style, but they're guaranteed to raise a smile.
For the verses, the guitar one part is really just playing on the accents on 2 and 4, and that's really with the snare drum, the backbeat. And the progression itself uses a G, an A, and a C chord. So what I'm going to do is use the same chord form here. This is what may look like an F chord shape from the first position, moved up to the 3rd fret. So my first finger's across the 3rd fret on strings 1 and 2, my second finger's on the 4th fret of the 3rd string, and my 3rd finger's on the 5th fret of the 4th string. So that's G. If I were to move this chord up 2 frets to the 5th fret, it's now an A chord. And if I move it up to the 8th fret, so my first finger's at the 8th fret, it's now a C chord. So I'm going to play the whole progression in time and then explain it slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And so you can see I'm just playing on the first strum there on beat 2 is to the G chord, then to the A chord on beat 4, to the C chord on beat 2, and back to the G chord on beat 4. You're just going to repeat those 2 measures. So that's really the first 4 measures. And then it goes to a full measure of A. So in the 5th measure of the verse, you're just going to play 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the 6th measure, you're going to play up to the C chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you kind of fall off on that beat 4. And the last 2 measures is just 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. And it's really, what's interesting is it's really a G chord to a C chord to a G, but this electric guitar part just hangs out down there on the 3rd fret. 3, 4, and you just strum 16th notes on beat 4 on a 7th measure. So that's the guitar one verse for Sgt. Pepper's. There's a 5-measure interlude between the verses and the choruses of the song, and really it's just a straightforward progression of dominant chords. The first one's a C dominant 7 chord, and so that's a C major chord with a B flat added to it. So I'm just adding the 4th finger to the 3rd fret of the 3rd string. It's important to notice that the guitar one actually isn't playing these chords, but if you were to strum along, these would be the chords you'd play. So C7, and then sliding up to the 6th fret. My first finger's now at the 6th fret. This is going to be an F7 chord. Back to C7, and then sliding up 2 frets to the D7 chord. So again, that's C7, F7, C7 to D7. And that's the interlude for guitar one for Sgt. Pepper's. chorus, you're going to play another 8-measure chord progression, and guitar 1 is just keeping the rhythm chords. I'm going to play it in time and then explain it slowly. So that starts with a G7 chord. My first finger is barring across the entire 3rd fret. My second finger is on the 4th fret of the 3rd string. My 3rd finger is on the 5th fret of the 5th string. And the idea is really just to get the 5th and 6th string, more or less, with the strumming. So you hear the power chord come out of that chord. So, and then sliding up to B flat, 3 frets higher. So that's G7 to B flat 7 to C7. If you get a little bit of that 4th note in there, that can make it sound cool as well. Down to the G, and then up to a C power chord. So this is just the 1st finger on the 3rd fret of the 5th string and the 3rd finger on the 5th fret of the 4th string. Down to the G. There's a little walk down to the 2nd fret and back. And so you're strumming 16th notes on that, and it's a little tricky because you need to mute the other strings involved. So you notice my first finger is just laying a flat across strings 1 through 5, like that. So the rest of those don't make any sound. And then back to the same progression we started with: G, B flat, C, G, and moving up to an A on the. This is actually an A7 chord at this point, but this guitar part is just going to play the bass note A. And again, same muting technique involved there. And then just ending in the last measure, the 8th measure, just on the D power chord. My first finger's on the 5th fret of the 5th string. My 3rd finger's on the 7th fret of the 4th string. So you're just going to play that on 1 and just let it ring out. And that is the first part of the chorus, which is really the 8-measure progression. After that, there's a little post-chorus, I guess you would say, a slightly different section where you're going to play. In fact, the guitar 1 really doesn't play at all during this section, but if you were to strum along, the chords would be a C chord, or C7, 2, 3, to a G7, 1, 2, 3, to an A7, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then C, C, G, G, G. And that's the guitar 1 chorus for Sgt. Pepper's. This is the Guitar 1 performance of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
It was 20 years ago today. Sgt. Pepper told the band to play. They've been going in and out to style, but they're guaranteed to raise a smile. So may I introduce to you the act you've known for all these years, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We're Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We hope you will enjoy the show. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Sit back and let the evening go. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's wonderful to be here, it's certainly a thrill. You're such a lovely audience, we like to take you home with us, we love to take you home. I don't really want to start the show, but I thought you might like to know that the singer's gonna sing a song, and he wants you all to sing along. So let me introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
The intro for Guitar 2 plays a really cool, grungy kind of aggressive part underneath the lead, and I'm just going to play it in time and then explain it slowly. So if you can imagine holding an A7 chord in 5th position, your first finger on the 5th fret as a bar chord, more or less. Second finger would be on the C sharp on the 6th fret of the 3rd string, and the third finger would be on the 7th fret of the 5th string. So that sort of gives you this fragment of an A7 chord there on strings 5, 4, and 3 rather. And the first part of it is real palm muted. You're going to play from the 4th string to the 5th string to the 3rd string. And then on beat 4, grab that, hit that 5th fret on the 2nd string, so you get back down to the 5th fret on the 4th string, so that's the first measure. In the second measure, you're going to add your 4th finger on the 8th fret of strings 1 and 2, actually barring across both of those, and it makes it an A7 sharp 9 chord. So what you're going to actually pick is the 4th string to the 3rd string, and then the 1st string. So you get, and that would actually be the 4th to the 3rd string to the 1st string, and then back to the 4th and 3rd string, and then the 5th string. So again, so the whole part for the first 2 measures is. At that point, it switches to a C7 chord, so you can come down to the 3rd fret to a C7 shape. My first finger is across the 3rd fret on strings 1 through 5. My 3rd finger is on the 5th fret of the 4th string, and my 4th finger is on the 5th fret of the 2nd string for C7. So I'm just going to strum the 4th and 5th string, and then pick the 3rd string, so you get. And then moving up to a bend from the 7th fret on the 3rd string, up a whole step, brought back down to the 7th fret, and then the 5th and 4th fret on the 3rd string. So we got landing right into the G7 chord. So this is a bar chord in 3rd position. My first finger is across the 3rd fret. My second finger is on the 4th fret of the 3rd string, and my 3rd finger is on the 5th fret of the 5th string. So that's G7. So again. Just let that ring on beat 2 there into the verse. So that's Guitar 2 for the intro on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper told the band to play. They've been going in and out of style, but they're guaranteed to raise a smile.
Guitar 2 during the verses just plays rhythm, and it's really an 8-measure progression, just involves 3 basic chords. The first one's a G7, and this is a bar chord in 3rd position. My first finger's across the entire 3rd fret, strings 1 through 6. My second finger's on the 4th fret of the 3rd string, and my 3rd finger's on the 5th fret of the 5th string, so that's G7. If I move it up 2 frets, that's an A7 chord, so now I'm at the 5th fret. If I move down to a C7 chord, this is just like a C chord, a basic open position C chord with my 4th finger playing the 3rd fret on the 3rd string to add a B flat into that note, into that chord rather, and that makes a C7 chord. So I'm just going to call out the chords as I play them, and you'll notice the accent is more or less on the backbeat on beats 2 and 4 during the verses, so it'll sound like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, C, G, G, A, C, G, A, C, G, C, G. And at the very end of the last verse, as it leads into "With a Little Help from My Friends," you're just going to go to a C chord after that G, a C7 rather, and let it ring. So that's the Guitar 2 verse for Sgt. Pepper's. For the interlude, Guitar 2 just plays the basic rhythm chords in the first part of the progression, which is C7 to F7, and back to C7. And when it would go to the D7 chord in the 4th measure, you just lay out, and then there's a D7 chord in the 5th measure, and there's one little fill at the very end. where you just play the 8th fret on the 1st string, and then bend up from the 8th fret to a whole step up, and then pick the string and release it for a release bend. So you get, so again, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, F, back to C, and this would be D, D, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And that's the Guitar 2 interlude for Sgt. Pepper's.
Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We hope you will enjoy the show.
For Guitar 2, you're going to play a series of bends and fills along with some rhythm chords. So I'm just going to play the whole thing in time and then explain it. So that starts with some really interesting sounding bends, and the first one starts with the 5th fret on the 3rd string. You're just going up a whole step and bringing it back down in 16th notes. And the rest of these are really interesting because they're semitonic and sound really cool against the chords behind them. So you get this, the 5th fret on the 2nd string, up a half step, brought back down, back up, and back down. You can kind of get some of that artificial harmonic stuff by picking with the edge of the pick and the thumb at the same time on those as well. After that, it just goes to a C7 chord, which we've had previously, to a G7 chord, and then back to the G chord. So you're going to do the bends again. You start with the 5th fret on the 2nd string, and then another bend up from the 5th fret on the 3rd string. And then the last little fill here, you're going to bend up, hold it up, grab the 6th fret with the 4th finger, 6th fret on the 2nd string that was, and release it. And then to an A7 chord, and then into a D7 chord, which we've had previously, and just let that ring. And you could fret the D7 chord like this, just like we did with the C7 chord, or you could actually fret it like this as well. 1st finger across the 5th fret, strings 1 through 5, 3rd finger on 7th fret of the 4th string, 4th finger on the 7th fret of the 2nd string for D7. So that's the Guitar 2 part for the chorus on Sgt. Pepper's. This is the Guitar 2 performance of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.